Plus, a pleasant day to each and every one of you. So, before we begin, let us start with a prayer. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely, goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen and amen. Okay. So, greetings class. Today, we will be discussing a special law. Okay. RA 9208 or the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003 as amended by RA 10364 or the expanded Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2012. Okay? So, this is an act that institutes policies to eliminate trafficking in persons, especially women and children, and it establishes the necessary institutional mechanisms for the protection and support of trafficked persons, providing penalties for its violations and for other. Okay? So, the purpose of this special law class is for the protection of the persons involved in human trafficking. Okay? So, more often than not, Filipinos are prone to abuses because most of our citizens go abroad to work. That's why, and especially our citizens work as OFWs, okay? So that's why we are abused by companies. The reason also why this law is enacted is because of our state policy under our constitution, which declared that the state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees the respect of individual rights. So, in pursuit of this policy, the state shall give highest priority to the enactment of measures and development of programs that will promote human dignity, protect the people from any threat of violence and exploitation, eliminate trafficking in persons, and mitigate pressures for involuntary migration and servitude of persons, not only to support trafficked persons, but more importantly, to ensure the recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration into the mainstream of society. Okay? Furthermore, our state policy states that it shall be a state policy to recognize the equal rights and inherent human dignity of women and men, as enshrined in the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights, United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, United Nations Convention on the Protection of Migrant Workers and Their Families, United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, including its protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, and all other relevant and universally accepted human rights instruments and other international conventions to which the Philippines is a signatory. Okay? So, class, the Philippines being a signatory to treaties, okay? So, we must uphold those treaties and integrate it to our local laws. So, that is why RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4 is enacted. Okay? So, let us begin. So, by the way, class, this is a primer. This is an overview of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. Okay? I will be uploading this also, class, to the class files for your reference. So, before we begin our formal discussion, there is an opening statement by our beloved President, Rodrigo Roa Duterte. And I will read. My warmest greetings to the Commission on Filipinos Overseas, CFO, as it publishes its Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003 primer. For many years, our overseas Filipino workers have been confronted with the ills of human trafficking, dashing their dreams of a meaningful and fruitful experience working abroad. I thus laud CFO for implementing mechanisms that enhance the scope and impact of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003, an important legislation that prevents and penalizes the exploitation of our countrymen. As you disseminate this important document, I call on you to remain steadfast in your duty to serve and protect our people. I encourage you to continue supporting this administration as we uphold the rule of law and advance public welfare. May this undertaking inspire more innovative and responsive solutions that will ensure that our citizens, especially the women and children, lead dignified and prosperous lives. I wish you success in all your endeavors. Okay? So, thank you, Mr. President, for that wonderful message. Okay? So, for the record, class, this primer, I found this in the internet. I think the author of this primer is the Commission on Filipinos Overseas. So, this is not my primer for intellectual property purposes. I did not make this. So, the author of this primer is the CFO. So, I'm using this primer for discussion purposes only. Okay? So, let us begin. Another message from the Secretary and Chairperson of AYACAT. Okay? Justice Francisco P. Acosta. So, what are the contents of this primer? Okay? Or the RA number 9208 as amended. So, inside the law, we will learn what is Republic Act 9208 as amended by Republic Act 1036-4. We will also learn what is the role of the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, or the AYACAT. And then, we will learn the definition of what is trafficking in persons. How is trafficking in persons different from illegal recruitment and human smuggling? What are the three categories of trafficking in persons? When is trafficking considered a large scale or committed by syndicate? Where to report the incidents of trafficking in persons? Who can file cases for trafficking in persons? Where to file cases of trafficking in persons? What is the prescriptive period for filing of cases? What are the penalties for violation of RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4? What are the mandatory services available for trafficked persons under RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4? And then, what protection is given to trafficked persons. And then we will also discuss what happens to the fines, proceeds, and properties derived from traffic in persons. And then we will discuss programs that are established for the prevention of trafficking, and then other programs that address trafficking in persons, and then some facts and figures on human trafficking, and then lastly, the AYACAT members directory. Okay? So this law class is very significant, especially in our fight against human trafficking. Okay? So as you can see in this picture at the left side, there is a message, "Human, Hindi Laruan," by John A. Bermejo. Okay? So let's proceed. So what is Republic Act 9208 as amended by Republic Act 1036-4? So RA 9208, also known as the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003, institutes policies to eliminate trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Okay? So this organic law creates policies for the protection of trafficked persons, especially the women and children who are the vulnerable sector. It establishes the necessary institutional mechanisms to protect and support trafficked persons and provides for its violations. This law will not only protect the vulnerable sector, but will also prosecute and provides penalty for such violation. In 2012, RA 9208 was amended through RA 1036-4, or the expanded Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2012. Okay? So again, at the left side, there is a drawing and there is a message. Wag ipangalalkal ang dangal, by Mr. Fernando Marcos. Okay? So, what is Interagency Council Against Trafficking? Under RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4, establish the Interagency Council Against Trafficking. Okay, so the council is called AYACAT. Okay, the counterpart, I think, of AYACAT is IATF against our fight against the COVID-19. So in our fight against human trafficking, the council, which is the proponent for the protection of the vulnerable sector against human trafficking, is the AYACAT, which shall be primarily responsible for coordinating, monitoring, and overseeing the implementation of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. It is composed of the following member agencies represented by their heads. So these are the members of the AYACAT. Department of Justice Chair, Department of Social Welfare and Development as Co-Chair, Bureau of Immigration, Commission on Filipinos Overseas, Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of Interior and Local Government, Department of Labor and Employment, Philippine Center for Transnational Crimes, Philippine Commission on Women, Philippine National Police, Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, or POEA, and then 3 representatives from non-government organizations who shall be composed of 1 representative from sectors representing women, overseas Filipino workers or OFWs, and children. These representatives are nominated by the member agency representative of the AYACAT for the appointment by the President for a term of 3 years. So, these are the members that constitutes the AYACAT. Okay? They are the agency that that is responsible for the implementation of the provisions of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. Okay? So, this is the AYACAT. Okay? And that is their logo at the side. So, what is trafficking in persons? So, by definition, trafficking in persons is an illegal act and is considered a violation of human rights and inimical. When you say inimical, it is dangerous to human dignity and national development. Okay? There are three interrelated and interdependent elements that must be present for a situation to be considered within the purview of RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4. These elements are, first, acts, second, means, and third, exploitative purpose. So these are the elements which constitutes the violation of the RA 9208. Okay, so let's discuss further. What are the definitions of acts? Okay, so it involves the recruitment, obtaining, hiring, providing, offering, transportation, transfer, excuse me, maintaining, harboring, or receipt of persons with or without the victim's consent or knowledge within or across national borders. So the acts, the definition of the acts is very broad. So even if it's still in the initial stage, there was no recruitment yet, okay, as long as you offer, as long as you provide transportation or harbor, okay, or even within our border, it is within the purview of the definition of the acts, okay, as sanctioned by RA 9208 or the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. Next is the means. It is committed by use of threat, force, or other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power or position, taking advantage of the vulnerability of the persons, or giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person. So, the definition of the means class is that you already have control, okay? Or you use threat, you intimidate, there is abuse, you use force, okay, in order to control the victim. Next element is the purpose. It is done for the purpose of exploitation or prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery, involuntary servitude, or the removal or sale of organs. Okay, so these are very common class. Okay, the purpose of which is to gain profit, okay, at the expense of our countrymen. So each of these elements must be present and linked to each other. The acts must be achieved by one of the means and both must be linked to achieving the exploitative purpose. Okay, so there must be a link also. The same concept with our last discussion, the chain of custody. Okay, so these acts or elements must be linked in order to be sanctioned by the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. Okay, so if one of the three elements is absent, then the situation may not involve trafficking in persons, except if it involves trafficking of a child. So the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, adoption, or receipt of a child for the purpose of exploitation, or when the adoption is induced by any form of consideration for exploitative purposes, shall also be considered as trafficking in persons, even if it does not involve any of the means mentioned. Okay? So it is important to take note that in order for the law, okay, or the acts to be sanctioned by the law of anti-trafficking in persons, there must be a link of the elements. However, if the victim is a child, so even though there are no links, still you can prosecute the persons who violates the same, because the child is protected by law. Okay, so even though there is no link, the best interest of the child is paramount. That is why persons involved will be prosecuted. Okay, now let's go to forced labor. Forced labor is the extraction of work or services from any person by means of enticement, violence, intimidation, or threat, or use of force or coercion, including deprivation of freedom, abuse of authority, or moral ascendancy, death, bondage, or deception, including any work or service extracted from any person under the menace of penalty. So when you say forced labor, there is an element of intimidation, an element of force or abuse of power in order to force the victim to work, okay, against his or her will. Okay, as you can see in the diagram. Okay, next, what is death bondage? So death bondage refers to the pledging by the debtor of his or her personal services or labor, or those of a person under his or her control, as security or payment for debt when the length and nature of services is not clearly defined, or when the value of the service as reasonably assessed is not applied toward the liquidation of the debt. Okay, so when you say debt bondage, you use debt to make the victim work. Okay, you don't pay the victim because his or her family is indebted to you, or the person is indebted to you, then you force him or her to work without pay. Okay, next, what is involuntary servitude? So involuntary servitude refers to a condition of enforced and compulsory service induced by means of any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause a person to believe that if he or she does not enter into or continue to be in such condition, he or she or another person should suffer serious harm or other forms of abuse or physical restraint, threats of abuse or harm, coercion, including depriving access to travel documents and withholding salaries, or abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process. So involuntary servitude is making the person, you force the person to work, okay, because you harassed her or him, or for example, very common abroad when the OFWs are working and then their passport are being held by the owners or by their bosses, okay, so that if they want to go home, they cannot go home because their passport is withheld against their will. So that is a classic example of involuntary servitude. Okay, next is slavery. What is slavery? Slavery is the status or condition of a person over whom any or all of the powers attaching to the right of ownership are exercised. Okay, so very common example is during the time of the Middle Ages, where the black people are being forced to work as slaves. Okay, now, what is the difference among trafficking in persons, illegal recruitment, and human smuggling? Okay, so here are the distinction of trafficking in persons, illegal recruitment, and human smuggling. So as to the means, under trafficking in persons, may or may not involve coercion, fraud, deception, abuse of vulnerability, and etc. So remember the definition of trafficking in persons. Even if you harbor for the purposes of profit, okay, so force or intimidation may not be present, but still you can be held liable for trafficking in person. Next, illegal recruitment. So usually does not involve coercion but uses more deception, promises, and fraud. Okay, so very common in OFW. Okay, because there are many placement companies who deceive the victim, okay, in order for them to profit. And then human smuggling usually does not involve coercion. Okay, so when you smuggle children, of course the ultimate purpose is profit. Okay, for example, there is a foreigner and you sell your child, then you use the legal way, for example the adoption process, in order for you to have money. So say you kidnap a child and then forced to be adopted to a foreigner, and then the foreigner will pay you. Okay, that's a classic example. And then entry of a person. So under trafficking in persons, characterized by subsequent exploitation after illegal entry of one person from one place to another or from one country to another. So there is exploitation of the victim, okay, under trafficking in persons. In illegal recruitment, it is characterized by facilitating entry of one person from one country to another through an unlicensed agency, licensed agency recruiting without job order, or an authorized representative of a licensed agency. Okay, so these are very common in OFWs, okay, because placement companies sometimes, in order to gain money, they tend to abuse the recruitment process. Next is under human smuggling, characterized by facilitating for a fee the illegal entry of a person into a foreign country. Okay. Next, for purposes of exploitation. So there is a need to prove presence of exploitation or that the recruitment was facilitated for the purpose of exploitation. So under trafficking in persons, under illegal recruitment, mere recruitment without license is punishable. No need to prove the consequential exploitation. Okay, so the act of recruitment without license can be punished. Okay, it is sanctioned in this law, the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. And then under human smuggling, proof of illegal entry by non-compliance with the necessary requirements for travel. Okay, so as evidence, you can use proof of entry documents. Okay, so there was none, so you can immediately prosecute the person responsible with regards to the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. And then human rights or migration issue. Under trafficking in persons, it is considered a human rights issue. And then all, so illegal recruitment and human smuggling, all are considered a human rights issue and the immigration issue, because this involves our countrymen, okay? But mostly in illegal recruitment, it is considered immigration issue, but there are elements of human issues also, okay? So what are the three categories of trafficking in persons? So the three categories of trafficking in persons and its punishable acts are the following. So first, acts of trafficking in persons: to recruit, obtain, hire, provide, offer, transport, transfer, maintain, harbor, or receive a person by any means, including those done under the pretext of domestic or overseas employment. Okay, so very common in OFWs. There, some of them are very exploited by unscrupulous individuals. Okay, placement companies whose mindset is only for profit. And then training or apprenticeship for the purpose of prostitution, pornography, or sexual exploitation. Okay, so here is a picture. And then next, to introduce or match for money, profit, or material, economic, or other consideration any person or as provided for under RA 6955, any Filipino woman to a foreign national for marriage for purpose of acquiring, buying, offering, selling, or trading her to engage in prostitution, pornography, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, involuntary servitude, or death bondage. Okay? So it's very common in the province where their children, okay, their women, the parents tend to make pre-arranged marriage with foreigners, because a foreigner is like a golden ticket. So that is why there are human abuses, really, especially in far-flung areas, in impoverished areas. Okay. So to offer or contract marriage, real or simulated, for the purpose of acquiring, buying, offering, selling, or trading them to engage in prostitution, pornography, sexual exploitation, forced labor, or slavery, involuntary servitude, or death bondage. And then to undertake or organize tours and travel plans consisting of tourism packages or activities for the purpose of utilizing and offering persons for prostitution, pornography, or sexual exploitation. Okay? So, again, very common. Okay? So, when there is a foreigner and then you present the exploited individuals like women and children to the foreigner for purposes of prostitution or pornography, then the persons involved can be prosecuted by this law, the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. Okay? Next, to maintain or hire persons to engage in prostitution or pornography. Next, to adopt persons by any form of consideration for exploitative purposes or to facilitate the same for purposes of prostitution, pornography, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, involuntary servitude, or death bondage. Next, to adopt or facilitate the adoption of persons for the purposes of prostitution, pornography, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, involuntary servitude, or death bondage. Okay, so these acts class are very common. Okay, there are elements of sexual exploitation. Okay, and then to recruit, hire, adopt, transport, transfer, obtain, harbor, maintain, provide, offer, receive, or abduct a person by means of threat or use of force, fraud, deceit, violence, coercion, or intimidation for the purpose of removal or sale of organs of said person. Okay, so as you can read on the letters of the law, it is encompassing. It's like a catch-all provision class. That is why this law is very broad. Okay, it has far-reaching consequence, so that the violators will be prosecuted. Okay, will be reached by the prosecuting arm of the law. Okay, because remember our discussion in criminal law that laws are jurisdictional and they must be specific. There are elements involved. That is why the elements stated here are broad. Okay. Next, to recruit, transport, obtain, transfer, harbor, maintain, offer, hire, provide, receive, or adopt a child to engage in armed activities in the Philippines or abroad. Okay, so very common in the Philippines, where children are being forced to join private armies, okay, or camps for armed conflict against the government. Okay, then they can be, the persons involved can be prosecuted by this law. Next, to recruit, transport, transfer, harbor, obtain, maintain, offer, hire, provide, or receive a person by means mentioned in the preceding paragraph for the purposes of forced labor, slavery, death, bondage, and involuntary servitude, including a scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause the person either, first, to believe that if the person did not perform such labor or services, he or she or other persons would suffer serious harm or physical restraint. Okay, so there is an element of intimidation. There is an element of deceit. Okay, deception. Okay. Next, to abuse or threaten the use of law or legal processes. Okay. So, next is to recruit, transport, harbor, obtain, transfer, maintain, hire, offer, provide, adopt, or receive a child for purposes of exploitation or trading them. Okay? Including but not limited to the act of buying or selling a child for any consideration or for the barter for purposes of exploitation. Okay? So, there's an element of exploitation with respect to the child. Okay? So, whatever acts, then it is sanctioned by this law. So it includes all forms of slavery or practices similar to slavery, involuntary servitude, death, bondage, and forced labor, including recruitment of children for use in armed conflict. Okay, so the children are being utilized as private armies. Okay. Then the use, procuring, or offering of a child for prostitution, production of pornography, or pornographic performances. The use, procuring, or offering of a child for production and trafficking of drugs. And the use, procuring, or offering of a child for illegal activities or work, which by its nature or the circumstances in which it is carried out is likely to harm their health, safety, or morals. And then to organize or direct other persons to commit the offenses defined as acts of trafficking. Okay, so even if you're just the organizer, okay, or you're just the as long as you profit class, okay, you can be prosecuted by this law. Okay. Now, let's go to its amendment, RA 1036-4, or the expanded the coverage of acts of trafficking in persons. So, what are the new introductory provisions of this law? First is attempted trafficking in person. So, when there are acts to initiate the commission of a trafficking offense, but the offender failed to or did not execute all the elements of the crime, by accident or by reason of some cause other than voluntary desistance, as such, an attempt to commit any of the offenses mentioned in the preceding paragraph shall constitute attempted trafficking in persons. Okay, so last time during our discussion, Okay, in criminal law 1, we discuss the stages, okay, of the execution of the crime. So there is the attempted stage, frustrated stage, and then consummated stage. So those stages is also applicable by virtue of the amendment, okay, the RA 1036-4. It amend the provisions of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003. Okay? Wait. Next, if the victim is a child, any of the following acts shall be deemed as attempted trafficking in persons. Okay? So, as you can observe, class, if the victim is a child, okay, it's like it qualifies the conditions needed. Okay? So, the more, the law is more stringent if the victim is a child. So, facilitating the travel of a child who travels alone to a foreign country or territory without valid reason and without the required clearance or permit from the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or a written permission from the child's parents or legal guardian. Okay? So, that's the purpose why if a child wants to travel and the company of the child is not the parents, so that person must seek a clearance, okay, with the SWD, and then ask written permission from the parents or the legal guardian of the child. Okay. Next, executing for a consideration an affidavit of consent or a written consent for adoption. Okay. So you will be prosecuted for attempted human trafficking. Next, recruiting a woman to bear child for the purposes of selling the child. Then, stimulating a birth for the purposes of selling a child. And then, soliciting a child and acquiring the custody through any means from among hospitals, clinics, nurseries, daycare centers, refugee or evacuation centers, and low-income families for the purpose of selling the child. Okay? So, as officers of the law, you should take note the end product or the intent why these persons do these acts. Okay, so the ultimate purpose is to gain profit. Okay, however, profit is not part of the element as long as these acts are performed and there are links. You can prove the links, then the person can be prosecuted. Okay. Next is accomplice liability. So, knowingly aids, abets, and cooperates in the execution of the offense by previous or simultaneous acts of trafficking. Okay. And then accessories, whoever has the knowledge of the commission of the crime and without having participated therein either as principal or accomplice, take part in its commission in any of the following manners: by profiting themselves or assisting the offender to profit by the effects of the crime. Okay, so even though there is non-participation, you can be prosecuted as an accessory if you profit from the crime itself. Okay, or you conceal or destroy the body of the crime, effects, or instrument in order to prevent its discovery. Next, you harbor, conceal, or assist in the escape of the principal of the crime, provided the accessory acts with abuse of his or her public functions or is known to be habitually guilty of some other crime. Okay. Next, amendment is acts that promotes trafficking in persons. So these are to knowingly lease or sublease, use or allow to use any house, building, or establishment for the purpose of promoting trafficking in persons. So even if you're just an owner of the building, okay, so you must be careful on the lessee. How will they use your property? Because if it was found out that your property is being used, okay, and was sanctioned against the law on anti-trafficking in persons, then you can be included and you can be prosecuted. Okay. Next, to produce, print, issue, or distribute unissued, tampered, or fake counseling certificates, registration stickers, overseas employment certificates, or other certificates of any government agency which issues these certificates, decals, and such other markers as proof of compliance with government regulatory and pre-departure requirements for the purposes of promoting trafficking in person. Okay, so misleading signages, you can be prosecuted also. Okay, to advertise, publish, or print, broadcast, or distribute, or cause the advertisement, publication, printing, broadcasting, or distribution by any means, including the use of information technology and the internet, of any brochure, flyer, or any propaganda material that promotes trafficking in person. Okay? Another amendment to assist in the conduct of misrepresentation or fraud for purposes of facilitating the acquisition of clearances and necessary exit documents from government agencies that are mandated to provide pre-departure registration and services for departing persons for the purpose of promoting trafficking in person. Okay? And then, actually class, these are matters of reading. This highlights the violations, the different violations of this act. Okay? Next, to facilitate, assist, or help in the exit and entry of persons from or to the country at international and local airports, territorial boundaries, seaports who are in possession of unissued, tampered, or fraudulent travel documents for the purpose of promoting trafficking in person. Okay? Next, to confiscate, conceal, or destroy the passport, travel documents, or personal documents or belonging of trafficked persons in furtherance of trafficking, or to prevent them from leaving the country or seeking redress from government or appropriate agency. Okay, so we made an example earlier. So if you withhold legal documents such as passport, then you can be prosecuted and you can be held liable. Okay, you can be considered a violator and be prosecuted by this law. Okay. And then next, to knowingly benefit from financial or otherwise or make use of the labor or services of a person held to a condition of involuntary servitude, forced labor, or slavery. And then to tamper with, destroy, or cause the destruction of evidence or influence or attempt to influence witnesses in an investigation or prosecution of a case. And then to destroy, conceal, remove, confiscate, or possess, or attempt to destroy, conceal, remove, confiscate, or possess any actual or purported passport or other travel, immigration, or working permit or document, okay, or any other actual or purported government identification of any person in order to prevent or restrict or attempt to prevent or restrict without lawful authority the person's liberty to move or travel in order to maintain the labor or services of that person. Okay, so when you are abroad, class, there are documents that you need to carry all the time. Okay, like passport, your working permit. Okay, so for example, a placement company, okay, withheld those documents, then you can file a case against them as a direct violation of this law. Next, to utilize his or her office to impede the investigation, prosecution, or execution of lawful orders in a case. Okay, so even if you impede the investigation, then it is considered also a violation of this law. Okay. Next amendment, by virtue of RA 1036-4, okay, is the qualified trafficking in persons. So, what are the qualified trafficking in persons? So, when the trafficked person is a child or below 18 years old, so when you say it qualifies, it means the penalty is increased. Okay? So these are the instances where the penalty are increased. So if the victim is below 18 years old. Next, when adoption is effected through RA 8043, otherwise known as the Inter-Country Adoption Act of 1955, and said adoption is for the purpose of prostitution, pornography, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, involuntary servitude, or death bondage. So this qualifies human trafficking. Hence, the penalty is increased. Next, when the crime is committed in a large scale or by a syndicate. Next, when the offender is a spouse, an ascendant, parent, sibling, guardian, or a person who exercises authority over the trafficked person, or when the offense is committed by a public officer or employee. Okay, so during our discussion in Criminal Law 1, we discussed that relationship is an alternative circumstance. So when you say alternative circumstance, so relationship can be used to mitigate or aggravate the crime. Okay? So in this instance, relationship is used as an aggravating circumstance because it qualifies the crime of human trafficking. So when you say it qualifies, mean the penalty is increased. Okay? Next, when the trafficked person is recruited to engage in prostitution with any member of the military or law enforcement agencies. Okay? Next, when the offender is a member of the military or law enforcement agencies. Okay? So if you are a member from these agencies, then it qualifies the crime of human trafficking. Next, when by reason or on occasion of the act of trafficking in persons, the offended party dies, becomes insane, suffers mutilation, or is afflicted with HIV or AIDS. Okay, so it qualifies. So the penalty is increased. Next, when the offender commits one or more violations over a period of 60 or more days, whether those days are continuous or not. Okay, so if there are series of acts which constitutes human trafficking. So even though those days are not continuous, as long as it exceeds 60 days, then it qualifies the crime of human trafficking. Hence, the penalty is increased. Okay. So next, when the offender directs or through another manages trafficking victim in carrying out the exploitative purpose of trafficking. Okay? Then, when is the trafficking considered a large scale or committed by a syndicate? Okay? So this is how human trafficking become a large scale or committed by a syndicate. Trafficking is deemed committed by a syndicate if carried out by a group of 3 or more persons conspiring or confederating with one another. So it is deemed large scale if committed against 3 or more persons individually or as a group. Okay, so it is considered a syndicate class if the perpetrators are 3 or more. And then it is considered large scale if the victims are 3 or more. Okay, so when it is a syndicate and committed in a large scale, then penalty is increased. Okay. Next, where should incidents of trafficking in persons be reported? So remember, a YACAT is composed of different government agencies. However, you can report it. Other agencies are not precluded to institute cases. Okay, or you can report them at those agencies. For example, the barangay authorities, or the nearest police or other law enforcement agencies, local social welfare and development offices, any member agencies of the AYACAT, the local anti-trafficking committee or task force, local council for the protection of children, 1343 action line against human trafficking. Okay? Next, international trafficking in persons can be reported to the following. So, if the case involves international transactions, then you report it to the following agency: the Philippine Embassy or Consulate, which has jurisdiction over the place where the trafficking occurred or where the trafficked person is or may be found. Next, all officers, representatives, and personnel of the Philippine government posted abroad under the leadership of the ambassador or the head of mission or the office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs or UMWA of the Department of Foreign Affairs under the DFA. Okay? So, law enforcement agencies are mandated to immediately initiate investigation and counter-trafficking intelligence, gathering up the receipt of statements or affidavits from victims of trafficking, migrant workers, or their families who are in possession of the knowledge or information about the trafficking in persons cases. Okay? So, who can file cases for trafficking in persons? So, the following persons may file cases for trafficking in persons. First, any person including a law enforcement officers, okay, like policemen such as yourselves, who has personal knowledge of the commission of the offense. Okay? So, any person class who has personal knowledge. So, even if you're not the victim, even if you are a third party, but you have personal knowledge that there is violation against the Human Trafficking Act, then you can file a case. Next, the trafficked person or the offended party himself, okay, the victim himself. Next, the parents or legal guardians. Next, the spouse, the siblings, or the children. So, where should cases of trafficking in persons be filed? Okay? So, complaints for violation of RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4 for the purposes of inquest or preliminary investigation may be filed with the following. Okay? So, the Department of Justice or the National Prosecution Service or the Provincial City Prosecution Office. Okay? So, you can file it at the Prosecutor's Office class because they are the one who are charged to prosecute those cases. Okay? As a member agency of the Anti-Trafficking Council or AYACAT. Okay? So, where the offense was committed, where any of the elements of the offense occurred, or where the trafficked person resided at the time of the commission of the crime. Okay? So, remember, in our discussion during Criminal Law 1, we discussed that criminal cases are jurisdictional. Okay? So, you file the case at the jurisdiction where the crime was committed, okay, or these instances are present, the residence of the victim at the time of the commission of the crime, or where any of the elements of the offense occurred. Okay, so remember class that the violations like acts, it is a sequence. So any of those series of acts where the crime has been committed, then you can prosecute the violator at that area. Okay? So cases involving trafficking in persons should not be dismissed based on affidavit of desistance executed by victims, their parents, or legal guardians. Prosecutors are directed to oppose and manifest objection to motion for dismissal. Okay? So, human trafficking class is this law is a law imbued with public interest. Okay, more often than not, victims are poor. So, of course, and the perpetrators are rich. So, of course, they will solve the problem using their money. So, they pay the parents of the victim, the families. Okay. Or the victim himself or herself. So, that is why, under the law, prosecutors are discouraged. Okay, they must object if there are desistance by the victim or even their families. Okay, because the human trafficking class is the evil that is sought to be prevented. Okay, So, such acts are imbued with public interest. So, the safety of the public must be upheld. Okay? So, the Philippine Embassy or Consulate shall extend all possible assistance to a victim of trafficking who wishes or opts to file the case in the host country or in the country where he or she is found, and where the laws of the country allows the prosecution of trafficking offense or a related or similar offense. Okay, so abroad, victims can seek help, okay, in order to prosecute the crime with the ambassador's office or the consular office. So, what is the prescriptive period for filing of cases? So, trafficking cases can be filed within 10 years after they are committed. Okay? So, the reckoning period is the commission of the crime. So, if trafficking is committed by a syndicate or on a large scale or against a child, cases can be filed within 20 years after the commission of the crime. Okay? So, of course, syndicate, commission in a large scale, and if the victim is a child, it qualifies the case. Okay? It qualifies the act. Hence, the penalties are increased. That is why the prescriptive period is increased also. Okay? Within 10 years, reckon from the commission of the crime. Okay? Then, prescriptive period is counted from the day the trafficked person is delivered or released from the conditions of bondage. Okay? So, the reckoning time is upon release from the conditions of bondage or servitude. Okay? Does the law provide extraterritorial jurisdiction on acts committed outside the Philippines? There's a question. The answer is the state shall exercise jurisdiction over trafficking acts committed outside the Philippines, and whether or not such act or acts constitute an offense at the place of the commission, the crime being a continuing offense having been commenced in the Philippines and other elements committed in another country. Okay? Next, what are the penalties for violation of RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4? So, the act of trafficking itself is 20 years imprisonment and a fine of 1 million to 2 million. Okay? If it's attempted trafficking, 15 years imprisonment and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million. If you are an accomplice, 15 years imprisonment and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million. If you are an accessory, 15 years imprisonment and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million. If you performs acts that promote trafficking, 15 years imprisonment and a fine of 500 to 1 million. If qualified trafficking, okay, there are conditions present which was enumerated above, okay, the instances that we have discussed earlier. So, penalty is life imprisonment and a fine of 2 million to 5 million pesos. Okay? So, when you say life imprisonment class, because this is a special law, so the nomenclature used is not the nomenclature of the revised penal code. Okay? So, the nomenclature of the revised penal code, the highest is reclusion perpetua. Right? In the other hand, in special law, the highest is life imprisonment. Violation of confidentiality, 6 years imprisonment and a fine of 500 to 1 million. And then use of trafficked person, prison correctional or imprisonment of 6 months and 1 day to 6 years and 50 to 100,000 fine. If involves sexual intercourse or lasciviousness conduct with a child, imprisonment of reclusion temporal in its medium period to reclusion perpetua and 500,000 to 1 million fine. Okay? So, the nomenclature used here in the penalty for use of trafficked person is the nomenclature of the revised penal code. Okay? Next, if it involves carnal knowledge or sexual intercourse with a male or female trafficking victim, and use of force or intimidation against a victim deprived of reason, or an unconscious victim or a victim under 12 years of age, reclusion perpetua or imprisonment of 20 years and 1 day to 40 years and 1 million to 5 million fine. If committed by a foreigner, deportation and permanently barred for entry. Okay, that's the penalty. If committed by public official, dismissal from service, perpetual absolute disqualification, and imprisonment. Then, what happens to the fines, proceeds, and properties derived from trafficking in persons? Okay, how are these money used? So, all fines imposed and proceeds and properties forfeited and confiscated pursuant to RA 9208 as amended shall accrue to a trust fund to be administered and managed by the AYACAT. This shall be used exclusively for programs that will prevent acts of trafficking and will protect, rehabilitate, and reintegrate trafficked persons into the mainstream of society. Okay, so all fines, all properties forfeited in favor of the governments, okay, all proceeds will be put into a trust fund, and this trust fund is used in furtherance of the law on Human Trafficking Act, and also in order to help the victims of the said violations. Okay? So exclusive, exclusive. The proceeds, the money, you cannot use it to another purpose. Because if you use it to another purpose, then a case for technical malversation can be filed against you. Okay? For example, you use it to finance the construction of an infrastructure. Okay? Not related to the law on Human Trafficking Act. Okay? So, a case for technical malversation can be filed against you. Next, what are the mandatory services available for trafficked persons under RA 9208 as amended by RA 1036-4? So, the following services are available for trafficked persons to ensure the recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration into the mainstream of society. Temporary housing and food facilities, psychological support and counseling, free legal services, medical or psychological services, livelihood and skills training, educational assistance to a trafficked child, and a 24-hour call center for crisis calls and technology-based counseling and referral system. Okay? So, those are the services, the collateral services that is sanctioned by this law. Okay? So, what protection mechanisms are available to trafficked persons? First are the legal protection. So, the law provides legal protection to victims of human trafficking. Trafficked persons are recognized as victims and shall not be penalized for crimes directly related to the acts of trafficking or in obedience to the order made by the trafficker. Okay, so these are victims. So, incidental acts by virtue of their being a victim, then they are not prosecuted by law. Okay, they must be protected by law. Okay, because they are victims against unscrupulous individuals that profits from their misery. The consent of the victim to the intended exploitation is irrelevant. Okay, so even if there is consent, then it cannot be used against them. Okay, it will not change the fact that they are trafficked individuals. So the past sexual behavior or sexual predisposition of a trafficked person shall be considered inadmissible. Okay, so if you prosecute the person with prostitution, then it is admissible in court as specified by the law. Okay, the law is very specific. You cannot use those acts against the victim. Evidence in proving the consent of the victim to engage in sexual behavior or the predisposition, sexual or otherwise, of a trafficked person. Okay, so inadmissible in court. Next is free legal assistance. Trafficked persons shall be provided with free legal services, which shall include information about the victim's rights, procedure for filing complaints and claiming compensation, and such other legal remedies available to them in a language understood by the trafficked persons. Okay? So for victims of international trafficking, the Department of Foreign Affairs shall provide free legal counsel and assistance in pursuing actions against his or her traffickers, represent his or her interest in any criminal investigation or prosecution, and assist in the application for social benefits and or regular immigration status as may be allowed by the host country. Okay? So, legal assistance is given to the victim. Next, temporary custody. So, rescue of victims should be done as much as possible with assistance of the DSWD, especially when it involves a child or an accredited non-government organization. After the rescue, victims should also be placed in the temporary custody of the local social welfare and development office or any accredited or licensed shelter institution. So these service providers shall provide the necessary assistance to the rescued trafficked persons and shall be responsible for their appearance during investigation and court hearings in coordination with the law enforcement agency. So there is temporary custody for the benefit of the victim, not just for their welfare, but also for their protection. Okay? Because more often than not, the violators will harass them so that the case will be withdrawn. Okay? Next, right to privacy and confidentiality. So, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, judges, court personnel, social workers, and medical practitioners, as well as parties to the case, shall protect the right to privacy of the trafficked person at any stage of the investigation, rescue, prosecution, and trial. The name and personal circumstances of the trafficked person or any other information tending to establish the identity of the trafficked person and his or her family shall not be disclosed to the public. Okay, so there is an element of secrecy, of confidentiality of the records, okay, of the case. Frontline officers and other service providers shall be trained on the importance of maintaining confidentiality as a means to protect the right to privacy of victims and to encourage them to file complaints. Okay? Next is the right to information. Trafficked persons shall be immediately provided information about the rights, nature of protection, and available assistance and support. Such information shall be provided in a language that the trafficked person understands. Okay? So when you, as law enforcers, when you communicate to the victim, you must communicate using the language that they understand. Okay? You explain to them the pros and cons, what the government can do, the available assistance and support, okay, in order to encourage them, in order to help them, and in order to protect their identity. When the trafficked person is a child, the interviews, examination, and other forms of investigation shall be conducted specifically trained professionals in a suitable environment and in a language that the child uses and understands. Okay? Now, let's go to the Witness Protection Program. Under Section 18 of RA 10364, okay, the law that amended the Human Trafficking Act, traffic victims are entitled to the Witness Protection and Benefits Program established under RA 6981. So, traffic persons who will testify, are testifying, or about to testify before any judicial or quasi-judicial body or any investigating authority may be admitted to the program under the following circumstance. Okay? So, those who are about to testify can be enrolled to the Witness Protection Program. Okay? For their protection. First, the testimony will be used in trafficking in persons case or a criminal offense related thereto. Next, the testimony can be substantially corroborated on its material points. Next, the trafficked person or any member of the family is subjected to threat or injury, or there is likelihood that he or she will be killed, forced, intimidated, harassed, or corrupted to prevent him or her from testifying. Okay, so that is why protection, okay, is very important, because the victim, more often than not, they will be harassed, they will be attacked, their families will be intimidated. There will be intimidation against their family. Okay, so that is why as police officers, as law enforcers, you must think of the welfare of the victim and their families. So to avail of the program, the trafficked person or persons acting in his or her behalf may file an application to the Secretariat of the Witness Protection, Security, and Benefit Program of the DOJ. Okay. So the benefit of the program may include security protection, immunity from criminal prosecution, secured housing facility, assistance in obtaining a means of livelihood, travel expenses and subsistence allowance while acting as a witness, free medical treatment, burial benefits, free education for the minor dependent children, and or non-removal or demotion at work in payment of full salary or wage while acting as a witness. Now, let's go to the Victim Compensation Program. So, established by RA 7309, the Victim Compensation Program provides compensation, okay, to victims of unjust imprisonment or detention and violent crimes. The Board of Claims under the DOJ is created under the said law to evaluate and process claims application. Okay, so class, these are amendments. However, as discussed earlier, there is a trust fund also that would help the victims, which is created by the Anti-Human and Trafficking Act, okay, or the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. So, more often than not, a trafficked person is also a victim of a violent crime which may cause physical injuries and or psychological damage, permanent incapacity or disability, insanity, abortion, and serious trauma, or is committed with torture, cruelty, or barbarity. Thus, a trafficked person who suffered any of these conditions is entitled to the benefits of the program. Okay, so this is in addition, class, of the already of the benefits which are already present in the law. Okay, thus a trafficked person who suffered any of these conditions is entitled to the benefits of the program. The trafficked person or his or her family may file a claim with the Secretariat of the Board of Claims at the DOJ or the Office of the Regional State Prosecutor. Okay. So, are foreign nationals trafficked in the Philippines entitled to the assistance and services available for the trafficked persons? So, the victims of trafficking in persons who are foreign nationals are entitled to appropriate protection. Okay, so even though they are foreigners, still the prosecuting arm will extend to them. Okay, so protection, assistance, and services available under the Act. They shall also be permitted continued presence in the Philippines for a length of time described by the Council as necessary to effect the prosecution of the offenders. Okay? So, what protection is given to the service providers? So, law enforcement officers and social workers or persons acting in compliance with a lawful order from the previously mentioned service providers may have immunity from suit for lawful acts done or statement made during an authorized rescue operation. Okay, so law enforcers, by virtue of this law, of this act, are protected. Okay? So during operations, if you have done something or said something, then you are immune from suit. Okay? So recovery or rehabilitation, intervention or investigation or prosecution of an anti-trafficking case, provided such act shall have been made in good faith. Okay? Service providers shall report any threat, harassment, or any form of danger that they can encounter in the course of the performance of their duties to their superiors, law enforcement agencies, and other appropriate units. So agency heads shall take all possible measures to ensure protection for job-related stress and safety of service providers in the performance of their duty. So as incentive class, you are given a benefit package also. Okay, if you're helping victims which were a victim of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act, okay, a victim of trafficking, so there are entitlements on your behalf. Okay. So what programs are established for prevention of trafficking? So Advocacy and Communication Committee. In December 2010, CFO became an ex officio member of AYACAT and was delegated to head the Advocacy and Communications Committee, ADVOCOM, because of its experience in handling the Presidential Task Force Against Human Trafficking. Okay? So the CFO-TPHT implemented its anti-trafficking program from 2007 to March 2010, covering the 4 areas of prevention, protection, prosecution, and reintegration. Okay? So the creation of AYACAT ADVOCOM is in line with the one of the functions of AYACAT as stipulated in Section 21 of RA 9208 as amended, which is to coordinate the conduct of massive information dissemination campaign on the existence of the law and various issues and problems. Okay? So these are just matters of reading, class. I'll leave this up to you. Okay? So the aims of AYACAT ADVOCOM. Okay, matters of reading. Okay, very important. 1343 is the action line against human trafficking. Okay. So to make the government services more accessible to the public, AYACAT through its ADVOCOM launched 1343 action line against human trafficking on March 15, 2011. So this hotline, it is a 24/7 hotline facility that responds to emergency or crisis calls from victims of human trafficking and their families. Okay, so if you are a victim or if you have personal knowledge that there is a violation of the act, you can call this hotline 1343. Okay, so the 1343 action line likewise provides a venue for public to be engaged in the fight against trafficking in persons. Its creation is also in line with the core message of AYACAT, which is laban kontra human trafficking, laban nating lahat. Okay, so this is the action line, class. Take a picture of this and then post it in your Facebook account. Okay, so here are the aim of the action line. This is just a matter of reading, class. There is also a website where you can report human trafficking violations, www.1343actionline.ph, email 1343actionline@cfo.gov.ph, or its Facebook account, facebook.com 1343actionline. Okay, there is also online counseling. Okay, so this is just a matter of reading, class. Okay, I will leave this up to you. So, what are the programs that address trafficking in persons? So, on the prosecution side, is the prosecution of trafficking of cases, which is implemented by the DOJ, POEA, or the local government units. Complaints investigation and apprehension system by the PNP, NBI, Bureau of Immigration, and the CHR. And then monitoring and documentation of trafficking cases, the DOJ, DOLE, OWA, LGUs, and CFO. Okay, so these are just matters of reading, class. I will leave this up to you. Okay, there are specific powers. Okay, for example, the DOLE, strict implementation and compliance with the rules and guidelines of local and overseas employment, like placement agencies. Okay, just a matter of reading. Okay, matter of reading. Now, let's read some fun facts on human trafficking. Okay, not fun facts, but facts. Some facts of human trafficking. Okay, so Global Slavery Index 2018 estimates that there are 40.3 million people, or 71% are women and girls living in modern slavery in 167 countries. Okay, so 71% are victims. Of this number, 24.9 million are victims of forced labor and 15.4 million are living in forced marriages. The same report also estimated that there are 784,000 Filipinos living in modern slavery. Okay. Next, the global estimates of modern slavery from year 2007 further reported that there were 5.9 adults who are victims of modern slavery for every 1,000 adults in the world. Okay? And 4.4 child victims for every 1,000 children in the world. So that's the rate of human trafficking, class. So in every 1,000 adults in the world, 5.9% are victims. In every 1,000 children, 4.4 children are victims. According to a report from the International Labour Organization, in 2014, human traffickers earn 150 billion annually. Okay, imagine the money involved, class. 150 billion US dollars annually, every year. Okay, just the business of human trafficking. So involved of forced marriage, slavery, or body organs, selling of body organs. And then 2/3 of the amount of US dollars, 99 billion, came from commercial sexual exploitation, while 51 billion came from forced economic exploitation, including construction, manufacturing, mining, agriculture, and domestic work. Okay. And then in the 2019 Trafficking in Persons report, Philippines is classified as a Tier 1 country by the U.S. Department of State in terms of effort to combat human trafficking. Okay, so we are at par with other countries against that fight of human trafficking. Okay, kamay na bakal tayo dito. So Tier 1 is the highest rank, but it does not mean that trafficking does not exist in the country. The ranking indicates that a government has made efforts to address the problem that meets the minimum standards of the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, okay, of the US. Next, the Philippines is identified as a source, transit, and destination country for men, women, and children trafficked for the purposes of sexual exploitation and forced labor. Okay, so because the Philippines, there are many poor. Okay, the poverty line is, there are many persons below the poverty lines. That's why our citizens are prone to human trafficking and abuses. So in 2015, UNICEF Philippines conducted the National Baseline Study on Violence Against Children in the Philippines, which reported that online sexual exploitation of children is a threat in the country. The Philippines is recognized as one of the top 10 countries producing pornographic materials on children globally. Okay, that's why the fight against human trafficking in the Philippines is also intensified. Okay, because we are tier 1 in the implementation of this law. We are at par with other big countries like the US. So from March 2011 to December 2019, 1343 action line against human trafficking received over 43,221 calls. So out of these calls, 649 actual cases reports involving 588 victims were gathered. The case calls made to action line have been instrumental in the conviction of a child trafficker in 2017 and 2018. Okay? As of December 2019, the Philippines has convicted 529 trafficking offenders from 528 human trafficking cases. Okay, so very good. Well done. And then here is the AYACAT members directory. Okay, their emails, their contact information, their details, their contact details. Okay, so I will be posting this in the chat. I mean in the files class. Okay, so don't worry. You can have this as your reference and as guidelines. I think this is free. There's no copyright intended because the author of this is the government. Okay. So this is the hotline 1343 action line against human trafficking. Okay. So class, the fight against human trafficking is very crucial. Okay, right now there are many profiteers or unscrupulous individual making profit against our hapless brothers and sisters. Imagine a yearly income of $150 billion, okay, just to exploit our citizens. So that is why the fight against human trafficking is intensified. We must prosecute. You are law enforcers. You must fight. You must protect the rights of our citizen. And if we uphold this law, of course, there will be changes and it will improve our economy as a collateral effect because our citizens will be empowered. Okay, our citizens will feel that they are protected by our country, by the government, by virtue of this law. Okay, so that's it, guys. So if you have questions, feel free to message me or email me. Okay, so thank you and God bless us all.